In this lecture, we will be reviewing the nature, origins, and functions of the self. Every species on this planet has unique qualities that set it apart from the other species. African pixie frogs can hang out for years underground in a self-made sack until a rainy season comes around. Octopuses have camouflaging skin that changes color and pattern to blend in with their surroundings. The hippos have their own natural sunscreen that oozes out of their pores. We humans can't do any of those things, but we have a pretty cool trick of our own. The ability to focus attention on our thoughts, feelings, and desires. In short, we have a sense of self. In some ways, the self is private. Only you know what it's like from your point of view. Yet, the self is also a thoroughly social thing. People's cultural and social environments profoundly shape how they understand and experience the self. The self significantly influences how they think, feel, and act in the social world. So, self-concept is a person's knowledge about him or herself, including one's own traits, social identities, and experiences. People's self-concept is shaped by their cultural and social environments. Culture shapes virtually all the ways people describe themselves. People understand and evaluate themselves in terms of social groups which they identify with. Even within a relatively small geographic region, we see cultural influences on people's sense of self. According to the social identity theory, people define themselves largely in terms of the social groups with which they identify. They come to know what characteristics they have by thinking of themselves in terms of family, race, nationality, and other important group memberships. Thus, two people raised in the same geographic region may define themselves in different ways depending on their group identifications. In addition to defining the identities, roles, and traits with which people describe themselves, culture differs in whether they promote an understanding of the self as an independent or an interdependent entity. In relatively individualistic cultures, for example, in North America, Australia, and Europe, people are socialized to view themselves as unique individuals, relatively independent from others. A person's self-concept enters around his or her attributes, abilities, thoughts, and feelings, like I am artistic or compassionate, and I want to excel in school. By contrast, people socialized in collectivist cultures, for example, China, Japan, India, and Mexico, tend to view themselves as interdependent, defined primarily in relation to other people, like I am a daughter and I am a musician. Of course, people do not identify with just one cultural group. For example, in the United States and Canada, the number of people who identify with two or more racial in-groups has increased by more than 25% in the past 15 years. This means that many people are increasingly expected to balance multiple identities, which can be stressful. Multiracial individuals feel pressure to choose one of their racial groups to fit in. They get embarrassing questions like, "What are you, anyhow?" And they face a higher level of social exclusion and discrimination than their monoracial peers. At the same time, research is starting to reveal that the ability to switch between multiple racial identities give multiracial individuals several advantages. For instance, they are more sensitive to social cues and are better able to flexibly adapt to their surroundings. Now, let us move on to gender influences. Men and women are more similar than they are different. Children learn from adults and the broader culture how men and women behave. Social role theory claims that men and women's biological differences favor different social roles, and those roles are often assumed to reflect natural limits on what men and women can and should be. Now, in regards to situational influences, the self-concept is stable from one occasion to another because people have self-schemas for the attributes that are important to them. At the same time, the self-concept can show features of the social situation, such as solo status, highlight different self-knowledge, changing the contents of one's working self-concept at any given moment. But the question is, how do we come to know the self? Well, reflections, comparisons, and self-perceptions are three important ways that people learn about themselves during the course of their everyday social interactions. So when we speak about reflection, people learn about the self by assessing how others view them. Others may serve as a mirror or a looking glass. Nevertheless, people do not always perceive accurately what others think of them. In comparison, people learn about the self by comparing themselves with others, especially those in similar circumstances. Upward social comparisons can threaten self-esteem. Downward comparisons can enhance it. Comparisons are often biased in the self's favor, sometimes due to ignorance or personal shortcomings. Now, in regards to self-perception, people learn about the self by observing their own behavior and making inferences about their traits, abilities, and their own values. These inferences can be wrong when behavior has unknown causes. A self-perception process also guides the experience of emotions based on one's bodily states, for example, physiological arousal, and labeling of the current situation. Now that we've discussed the self-concept, it's time to turn to the ego, the part of the self that drives and controls behavior. We will focus on self-regulation, how people decide what goals to pursue, and how they attempt to guide their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to reach those goals. The ability to self-regulate is based on three key capacities of the human mind. First, we are self-aware, able to assess our thoughts, feelings, and behavior in relation to the world around us. Second, we can imagine abstract goals and hypothetical outcomes, such as curing cancer or being more compassionate. And third, we are able to mentally travel in time, to pop out of the here and now, to reach back to our past and envision the distant future. So in short, self-regulation is a set of processes for guiding one's thoughts, feelings, and behavior to reach desired goals. And the self-awareness theory is the theory that aspects of the self, one's attitudes, values, and goals, will be most likely to influence behavior when attention is focused on the self. Research has discovered numerous factors that make self-regulation difficult. These findings point to some concrete strategies that people can use to improve self-regulation and achieve their goals. Strengthened willpower by avoiding factors that block the quote-unquote cool system for staying on track, such as stress, cognitive overload, and alcohol. Minimize iconic processing. Reappraise difficult situations as a way to avoid feeling strong negative emotions. Form quote-unquote if-then rules to program yourself to respond to situational cues with specific goal-directed behaviors, and monitor goal processes as you go along. And lastly, maintain a balance between self-focused pursuit of some goals, letting go of goals that are beyond reach. Maintaining a state of optimal well-balance then require a delicate balance between self-focused pursuit and some goals, and at the same time letting go of goals that is beyond our means.